Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me. And let me jump in with a basic question of why am I here? Not an existential crisis to begin things off. I'm saving that for lunchtime. Not the standard opening of an Oxford academic in Cambridge. Why am I at this young upstart university? But actually, why am I on this panel and not the afternoon's panel? Because I initially started thinking I was going to drift towards infringement type questions. But I then realized that I'm more squarely in the second provocative question that the setup for this conference has, which is how is AI affecting IP rules? And in this case, the very fundamental foundations beneath the IP rules, and in this case, trademark law in particular. So what I'm going to be looking at is how AI and machine learning in particular threatens trademark functions. And a quick reminder of what trademark functions are. We protect trademarks to preserve their functions. We protect trademarks for what they speak, what they say to consumers. That's the basic sort of rationale. And so here's a reminder from Skykick, the Supreme Court recently. And we have these different functions which tend to stack on each other. So we start with the origin or source function. Where did it come from? Who manufactured it? We then have consistent quality. This Coke tastes like the last Coke. And then you build up advertising, a positive image, investment in a valuable brand, and so on. So that's how the functions stack. And the thinking here is, will AI bypass trademark functions? Because the argument is quite simple once you're aware of it. A trademark was always a heuristic device. It was a shorthand to convey all of that key information to consumers in one compressed form. It's sort of like price in neoclassical economics. It's that compressed signal which condenses all the information you need and makes the whole logic of the market work. But if AI can reach beyond the trademark or around the trademark and rummage around with the context and look at the product reviews and look at the instructions manual and look at the comparators and look at who's saying what about the product, then why do you need a trademark anymore? And that's really the concern. And what's really of concern is the wobbling this causes for the brand and investment in advertising functions once you pull the origin and quality functions away, because these functions stack with each other. So if AI bypasses trademarks, does AI bypass brands as well? And what's going to happen to brands in the future? So is the rug being pulled out from under them? So people have started worrying, and because we're academics, we tend to worry well in advance. We love a good worry. So we're already starting to worry about it. Brands haven't disappeared. They're still around. But this is sort of thinking ahead to the future. So that's probably the most provocative one there by Mike Grinberg. And he's talking about AI and the death of trademarks, which is where the title of the talk comes from. Removing the human from trademark law. Lots of different papers, including Christine's paper on trademarks in an algorithmic world. And what they're basically saying is raising a number of issues around the vanishing of trademarks, the gradual sort of disappearance of trademarks. So Mike runs a thought experiment where he says if AI directly obtains all the information for which trademarks are a heuristic device, do we need a diminished, weaker residual trademark law at the end of it? And he starts off by saying trademarks function by simplifying information. If the AI, they're a shortcut, but they're a second best shortcut if AI is better at getting at that information. So you have a sufficiently advanced AI shopper, then it can analyze all of that context and bypass trademarks. So do we need a weaker residual trademark law? And Christine Farley has a similar line. She says, if you dissolve the functions, then you undermine the normative foundations of trademark law. Trademark law rests on things like search costs theory. Trademarks are supposed to reduce consumers' mental search costs in searching for things. But if AI does that work, and we've got a number of digital alternatives, the normative underpinnings of trademark law tend to collapse. And much of it is substantiated through the paradigm shift in online retail. So we know that machine learning can infer correlations from patterns. It may end up knowing your preferences better than you do. Welcome to surveillance capitalism. Goodbye privacy. Hello manipulation. And hello to commodifying the social. You're giving up on lots of stuff. And algorithms influence consumer purchase decisions. That's where we're going with this. We can see it in predictive analytics for anticipating choices. So think of how good Amazon's got, how good Netflix has got at recommending things to you, customized digital marketing, curated personalized recommendations. So Amazon's giving you bespoke suggestions based on big data, based on your previous purchases, customer ratings, browsing history, and information about complementary products, plus surges in interest, who else is buying what's good in this season, lots of different data points to curate and personally recommend things to you. But finally, the end goal is presumptive purchases, where the AI does the shopping for you. All of this is still giving you curated decisions, narrowing the field of decisions you're being given, but you still get to decide. But that endpoint is presumptive purchases. You've got things like the Internet of Things, connected IoT devices. The stock example is the fridge which restocks, the printer which orders the ink when it's sort of time to do that. And Neva, who's here, and you're going to hear from later this afternoon, she co-authored a paper in 2017 where she talked about algorithmic consumption and algorithmic consumers and shopping agents, where you delegate researching, evaluating, and purchasing goods to digital agents. And of course, it's a mixed bag. You can see the advantages of speed in terms of time saved, the sophistication and comprehensiveness of the analysis, the reduced transaction costs, and there's an assumption baked in here, an immunity to persuasive advertising, so the emotional heartstrings that are tugged at by brands, you bypass all of that. In fact, that's what's worrying the branders, but you trade off autonomy. You tend to defer to precedent. So you enter the echo chamber, you buy more of the stuff you previously liked, and your exposure to new things potentially goes down. And of course, manipulation, because the data isn't perfect. This is not a clean and impact, sort of a clean, logical, neutral process. So this looks scary, but are we there yet? Looks a little too scary. So I started wondering where we are in that journey. And what is the other evidence to signal that brands are still relevant? And there's lots of evidence to suggest that brands aren't immediately disappearing, but sort of being aware of the path we're on is a very helpful process. So the ONS has very helpful statistics, and the majority of sales are still offline. So even as of December 2024, online retail sales accounted only for 27% of the total. But if you look at the rate of pickup, how much this has increased, it was only 2.8% in November 2006. So online sales are on the up, they're ever increasing. And it tends to hover between 27, 28, and 32% over the past months in December itself. You can see it's sort of peaking at 30% occasionally. So we're not there yet in terms of a saturated online retail only environment. And even online brands are still relevant. So one of the things you would expect to see, one of the alarm bells, the canaries, and it's a big bright yellow canary in this case, is Google is probably the world's largest advertising company, right? Google makes all of its money from advertising. And if brands are disappearing, then you would expect them to be really worried about where that advertising revenue is going. And there haven't been any signals from there that is going to be a major concern. However, some people are starting to write about advertising machine to machine directly. And that could be a phenomenon that we just haven't anticipated, and that might yet happen. And brands aren't going to disappear even in the world of big data and machine learning, because brand preferences will form part of your past purchasing patterns and the preferences of individual consumers, part of their big data, which will then feed into subsequent recommendations as well. So brands are still relevant in these senses. And finally, there is the important point of affect and people having emotional connections with brands. So the brand is a key component to many products themselves. Consumers have these affective relationships. They love their brands. And in other cases, brands work as Veblen goods. So they signal status. You have your Hermes bag, your Chanel stuff, you strut your stuff and it says something about you. And that signaling effect in the real world is going to continue. And brands are going to continue to matter to consumers for that reason. So these are reasons to think that we're not under immediate threat in terms of brands disappearing. But where are we on this journey? My speech isn't going well. She just walked in and out. Where are we? No worries. Come on in. Where are we on this journey? So I decided to focus on algorithmic agents because that's really the autonomous agents who buy stuff on your behalf. That's the real concern. So what is the current consumer research on this journey towards autonomous agents? So there is some very interesting research emerging where people are conducting experiments. These take the form of controlled experiments where people are asked a bunch of questions. So it's survey design related. And what they're trying to probe is how important autonomy is to consumer decision making. So autonomy in the form of choice is really important to consumers and is central to their well-being. That's one of the core foundations of this field. But people are beginning to test when there are concessions around autonomy. People are willing to trade off to AI. And that's what the research is showing here. So Frank and Otterbrink have a very interesting paper. The experiment they run is asking consumers when they're willing to hand over to AI to buy them a new TV once they've given them the AI the parameters for that TV set. And they're saying it's your money, but there are two different AI models here. So the AI will first suggest a time to you to buy the TV when the potential savings are the highest. So you still have autonomy in the situation. Or once you've told the AI the kind of TV you want, it automatically purchases the TV when the potential savings are highest without any notification to you. So it just does it on its own. And they explored the perceptions of high versus low AI autonomy. And they did confirm the hypothesis in general that there's a sense of powerlessness with the high autonomy AI here, which tends to lower purchase intentions for consumers. So greater AI autonomy does not add value for consumers. So they're not going to take up or sign into or buy into these bots because they're concerned about losing this autonomy. As long as you have some degree of control, there's a greater openness to this kind of AI. But this model does have certain outliers. The effects are mitigated in conditions of scarcity. We're talking about Black Friday. So the moment there's a Black Friday kind of phenomenon where you've got hurry, limited stocks, while stocks last chance, people are more willing to switch over to this model and concede their autonomy and happily step back and let the AI do it. So this literature is interesting. It's exploring how far autonomy as a core value for consumers go and how much they're willing to hand over to the AI. There's also consumer resistance to adoption. So this is developing the same theme. This is by Husseri and Rossi also in 2024. They looked at the difference between sort of broadly tracking the two choices you have on the previous slide between AI recommender systems and autonomous shopping systems. Now, for people who are studying marketing research, that's a terrible acronym. Like, that's just the worst acronym that you can think of. But that's the one they've chosen, so I'm sorry, that's on the next two slides. So you've got recommender systems and autonomous shopping systems, and the puns are yours in your heads. You can narrow choices down to consideration sets through recommender systems. So that's what Amazon tends to do for you. It gives you a limited curated field of choices. And that narrowing down still preserves free will because you've chosen the parameters for narrowing down. But there are limits on your freedom, and the more that gets oppressive, the narrowing down, the more there's resistance to it, even with recommender systems. So for example, if you don't know why the shortlist has been generated, you're a bit skeptical or suspicious of it. So that's in terms of choices. And engaging in the final purchasing decision, the actual decision itself, the Internet of Things, the shipping, then shopping model. So they ship you the stuff, you then decide what you want to keep or whether you want to keep it at all. There's significant resistance as you move towards that kind of model. So the delegation of purchasing tasks to AI, which restricts choice and decision dimensions of autonomy, reduces the likelihood of AI adoption, even when product choice evaluation is complex. So even when you've got these technical, messy products with a lot of information to plow through, there's still apprehension about handing over to the AI entirely here. But again, there are caveats. So with the previous recommender systems findings, you see that there are ways to get people to engage more with these systems and give positive evaluations of them. And that has to do with ways to make users interact more with these systems. So where you allow inputs for things like attribute preferences, you can revise your preferences. There's options to tweak the results that you're shown, so show more popular items. Or the recommender system says, tell me what kind of product you want in terms of its attributes, but also tell me why you want this product. And I will factor that in as well. And I'll take both these sets of information and work with it. There's much more buy-in with those kinds of recommender systems. So when you're going for explicit preference elicitation and you're working with an AI system, that tends to work better. But the new systems reduce control over input processes and output. And here consumers are asking this question much more acutely. Is autonomy for convenience as a trade-off desirable? And what are the boundary conditions? And in general, people prefer their autonomy, but there are certain boundary conditions when they're happy to give it up. So we saw Black Friday as one of those conditions on the previous slides. Here, it's strong identification with a task. So if you're a runner, you get this running app. And if you're looking for running shoes, you're happier to trust the running app that you've been using to buy the shoes for you, because you identified with it, you seem happy with its field-specific expertise, and you're happier to delegate in those circumstances. So what this literature seems to be suggesting is actually something quite worrying. It says, okay, we take autonomy as our core, but here are ways of starting to nibble around the margins of autonomy and start finding exceptions and boundary conditions and ways to make people hand over more to AI, because that seems to be overall beneficial. And why do consumers need to do this when the AI can do it better? So that's a little worrying about this literature in terms of the enthusiasm for making people hand over to AI. So that's where things are going. Is there an immune system response from trademark law? Is there anything trademark law can do about this? Does it have resources to respond to this meta assault on trademark functions? So there are a few different futures people have started to consider in terms of online retail. The first point is really starting with the consensus that emerged around the way trademark law responded to keyword advertising. Now, it's interesting to look back to that line of cases because keyword advertising was actually the first run of trademark law meeting AI. Because even 10 years ago, all of the online marketplaces were using AI recommendation systems. So if you go back to Richard's judgment from L'Oreal and eBay from quite a while ago, 2009, it was already resting on layers of AI, but these were closer to expert systems. This was more rules-based AI kind of systems. Online shopping was already resting on different versions of AI. And really the consensus there was, we'll focus on the presentation of search results. And if the presentation is misleading, then you've got to clean that up. You as the marketplace or the advertisers who are creating ambiguous advertisements, there is a trademark law-induced responsibility to clean that side of things up. But the way the AI at the back end matches search terms to certain results and outputs, that was left largely intact as a result of the Google France decision, the back end side of things. And will we need to revisit that consensus now? Because there are new cases saying, and at this point, I should say, somebody hand Lionel an air sickness bag because I'm about to mention two cases. The first is Mitsubishi, which is a case he loves to hate, which is a case which says if you remove trademarks completely from a product, that's still a trademark infringement because you're killing the core trademark functions. And they pick up on that case in a case that was never fully litigated. It was raised about the use of Manchester United by the FIFA video game manufacturers when they didn't want to pay the license anymore. So they stopped using the trademark, but they still tried to hint at it using colors and other signals that it was supposed to be the same team. So when you remove trademarks entirely, you're still harming their functions. And as this new AI technology seems to strip trademarks away, will we see a revival of these kinds of arguments saying, you're killing the functions, that's a sort of trademark claim we can run. We might see weaker trademark law online, where you no longer have an average consumer, but you have a sophisticated AI-enhanced consumer who is less likely to be confused because she's smarter, she's better equipped with these kinds of tools. You might just switch over to dilution, because trademark dilution is not about confusion, it's about mental associations which harm the brand value or the evocative value of trademarks. So you might see more of those kinds of claims, or you might see stronger trademark law offline through claims like post-sale confusion, saying you got a lot of technology to help you not make a mistake at the point of sale, but what happens to the product once it's out in the world? And I'll show you a couple of slides about how that argument runs. And of course, beyond and underpinning all of these challenges to what's happening at the back end of these systems is really how honest are these systems? How accurate are these systems? And that's not an IP problem. That's an AI Act kind of problem. That's a competition law problem. That is a regulatory problem for other areas of law to look at in terms of just directly working with all of the variables that trademarks are supposed to represent. So here's one case which sort of shows you how the problem might shift from the point of sale because the machine knows everything to what happens in the real world. So Iconics versus Dream Pairs was about the claimant who owns that trademark over on your left, going after Dream Pairs, who owns that trademark on your right. And the context of sale was online-only retail purchases. So this was the context of actual sale, and the argument was the sales context has so much perfect information that consumers are not going to be confused. Bear in mind, we're talking still about human consumers, not AI agents shopping on your behalf, who are even less likely to be confused. And the argument there was, even if there's the successful argument on appeal was even if there's no point of sale context confusion because of the context, there is the likelihood of post-sale confusion because that's where you're likely to actually encounter football boots out in the real world. Of course, the difficulty with that argument at the end is it sort of shifts. It shifts consumers away from the point of purchase out into the wild when they may not be in consumer mode. That's one of the problems. But also one of the other problems is if then the consumers loop back into the online retail context because they see the boots in the real world, but they buy the boots online again, are we back to the world of perfect information? And we don't really have a problem. So I just thought I'd raise these as some provocation and very happy to take questions. Thank you.